Hello and welcome to Team Bulldogs presentation today about identifying the drug misuse patterns from the Rocky Mountain Poison and Drug Safety Center dataset. So when we first got the dataset, the first thing that we thought of was breaking it down into the number of different illicit drugs that people had used. And so this is a quick distribution that we made with the purpose of exploring different demographics and how it affects the number of illicit drugs that are used by people. And so these different variables of interest that we wanted to look at were the types of drugs that were used by people, the recency of the illicit drugs that were used, income level, gender, race, education level, and whether or not they've received treatment or counseling for the drug use in the previous year. And so this visualization shows the drugs that were used most often by the drug users in the data set, which were coke, LSD, and mushrooms. And so we decided that it would be a much better use of our time to explore these three drugs specifically, since they're the most commonly used. And so from here, we made three graphs showing the correlation between other variables and whether or not they coincide with people who had used each drug. And so, for example, this graph right here is for coke users. We made one for LSD users and for mushroom users. And what's interesting is that the questions that they all have in common on the y-axis are completely identical for LSD and mushroom users and nearly identical for coke users as well. And what's specifically interesting is that for all three, the use of cannabis had the most correlation between the users, which testifies to the fact that cannabis is a gateway drug. And so it's kind of crazy to think about how nearly 100% of coke, LSD, and mushroom users have used cannabis at some point. In addition, the majority of them, about 90%, have used ibuprofen and other pain relievers, including opioid use at just under 85% for coke, mushroom, and LSD users. So from here, we wanted to compare the income level and education levels to the number of users of each drug. And so from these distributions, you can see that since they are right skewed, that means that the median of the coke user falls between $25,000 to about $50,000 in income annually. And so this is an indicator that as income increases, that the number of illicit drug users for coke, LSD, and mushrooms tends to decrease. And in addition, the purple columns in the stacked bar charts represents those people who have graduated from college. And so this is also an indicator that a lot more drug users have not graduated from college than those who have. And so from here, we wanted to compare the recency of the drugs used to the number of total illicit drugs used by gender. And so we found that on average, males use more illicit drugs than females. But the interesting we noticed here is that for those users who have used mushrooms within the last month, females on average use more illicit drugs. So this is also something interesting that we found when it came to the recency for the illicit drugs. And keeping that trend going, the only thing different between these two box plots, other than the color, was that we changed the fill variable to whether or not they received counseling or treatment for their drug use in the last year. And what's interesting here is that you can see a little more separation between some of the different box plots. And so this might be an indicator that, okay, it takes about 1 to 4 weeks for someone to realize that they have a problem, because that's how long it takes to noticeably increase in the number of illicit drugs that they're using, at least for cocaine. And so this could be an indicator that it takes 1 to 4 weeks to realize that you really have a problem to seek treatment. But this is also interesting because over time, the number of total illicit drugs used decreases for each drug. But those in counseling have oftentimes used more drugs than those who have not received counseling, which is something else that's interesting to note. And then finally, we used a violin plot to show the different uses or the different number of illicit drugs used by race. And what's interesting here is on average, the the plots are very thick at the bottom, meaning that most people who use illicit drugs, it's only a few drugs. Whereas those who receive counseling or recent treatment, it's a lot more uniform. And so it could be anywhere from 1 to about 10 or so drugs.